So I had never heard of it. Forest Elementary School, Warner Middle School, Interlochen Arts Academy, the University of Michigan, and Hebrew Union College, all the schools that I attended, and I had never learned about it. And while I've never had a brain for remembering historical detail, Jeff does, and he also never learned about Juneteenth through all of his schooling. It was only after arriving in Houston and living here for a little bit did we learn about Juneteenth. And even then, it was pretty cursory. We were told it was the day that the slaves in Texas learned that they were free. For all those years, that's really all we knew. In part because it wasn't something emphasized in message or meaning around us. And that's all we knew because we didn't feel motivated or interested or compelled at the time or up until now to learn more. I sit at this moment embarrassed by that, not proud of being so comfortable with my ignorance, my lack of curiosity, my ease of moving along to the next thing because I didn't feel Juneteenth had anything to do with me or my story or my life. I was wrong. I've heard and seen the word Juneteenth so many times in the past couple of weeks, in news stories, social media posts, articles, podcasts, and webinars. My Shabbat preparation this week took me on a deep dive about Juneteenth, a quest to learn, to understand, and begin imagining what recognizing and even celebrating Juneteenth might look like. I wanted to know how to celebrate what is called Freedom Day, among other things, a day that has so significantly changed the lives of so many. But more than anything, I wanted to understand how it was that Abraham Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation of September of 1862 could go unobserved for 2.5 years. 2.5 years. That seems like a really long time. Surely the people of Texas knew of the executive order. And indeed they did, I learned. Captain Paul J. Matthews, founder and chairman of the Buffalo Soldiers National Museum, explained that Juneteenth brought enforcement of the presidential declaration. Texas, being the most remote of the slave states, was the last to officially receive the order in a compelling way. Even though word of mouth spread, Captain Matthews explained, what were the enslaved blacks going to do? Drop their tools in the middle of the field, knock on the front door of the master's house and say, I'm free, see you later. No, that would have never worked. And what were the slave owners going to do? Suddenly realize that their actions were immoral and inhumane and surrender the wealth they had accumulated in people? Of course not. Only the presence of troops who had rifles in their hands could compel slave owners to let their slaves go. For slaves and all those of color and those who opposed slavery, Juneteenth was the fulfillment of dreams and prayers, a day of long-awaited redemption. I wondered, for such a hugely significant day in American history, why had I never heard of it? After Juneteenth, 1865, there were annual celebrations that even became quite commercialized in the South in the 1920s and 30s. But then, during the Jim Crow era, as Black people were often prohibited and afraid of gathering and celebrating in public spaces, many celebrations went underground and were held in churches and at people's homes. The day was historically celebrated with family gatherings, enjoying traditional foods and song and dance, a time when people would dress up in their finest clothing and read the Emancipation Proclamation out loud to remind them of their freedom. It is reminiscent to me of some of our Pesach traditions, of gathering, retelling our story of bondage and liberation, eating symbolic foods and singing. It was only in the 1970s that more public celebrations began to reemerge. And while most states observe Juneteenth as a holiday, it is yet to be declared a national holiday. Again, I think back to those 2.5 years between the Emancipation Proclamation and Juneteenth and wonder why it took so long to get from one to the other. This week's Torah portion may shed some light on this. We read in Parshat Shalach Lecha of the spies who are sent to explore the land. Moses instructs them to go up there and see what kind of country it is, to discern if the people who dwell in the land are strong or weak, few or many, if the land is good or bad, are the towns open or fortified, and to bring back some of the fruit. When the spies return, most of them report of a large fortified city inhabited by people, powerful people, and assert that they cannot attack the people, for they seem as small as grasshoppers in their own eyes, and that the inhabitants are stronger than they are. It is Caleb who then hushes the people and says, "Let's go up, for surely we can overcome it." The people are overcome with fear, and they rail against Moses and Aaron, lamenting that they should have just died in Egypt or even in the wilderness, asking why God would take them into the land to die, and declaring it would be better to go back to Egypt. The people, our ancestors, they think it would be better to go back to Egypt, to slavery, to what they knew, than change and go into the new land. What we know, that which is familiar, has a strong pull and momentum, often stronger than that which can or might be, and even stronger than what we want and pray it will be. I imagine that those 2.5 years were filled with the same kind of lamenting and fear and uncertainty and disbelief that things could be different, that slavery would ever really end. Torah tells not just of the journey of our people toward the promised land, but also what it means to be human, to be afraid and to continue forward, especially in times of difficulty and uncertainty, and that there is a promised land, that redemption is real, and sometimes takes a lot of wandering to get there. On this Juneteenth, as celebrations and teaching and awareness abound, it feels like we have newfound footing in our wandering towards the promised land of freedom and racial justice. But let's be very clear, we are not there yet, not nearly there, but we do have more people on the path, I think, heading in the right direction than there have been in a long time. So let us keep marching together, holding strong when the pessimistic voices ring out, and ever committed to ensuring the promises of real freedom and justice for all.